A grown man is on his knees in wet grass at 6 in the morning, holding a bucket that would put a third-degree burn on anyone careless enough to tip it the wrong way. No gloves, no mask, no truck idling nearby with a chemical tank strapped to the back. Just a man, a bucket, and a mound of dirt that spent the better part of a year quietly building an empire underneath his pasture. In about 10 minutes, that empire is gone. Not weakened, not scattered off to rebuild somewhere else in the field, the way it does every time someone tries the easy version of this. Gone, queen included. And he didn't spend $1 on poison to make it happen. This is how fire ants get dealt with on Amish farms scattered through fire ant country, from parts of Texas up through Tennessee and Kentucky, where the ground itself turns dangerous for livestock and for kids who still run around barefoot in July. It's old enough to sound like a myth, right up until you watch it work. An active mound isn't hard to spot once you know what to look for. Fresh dirt, no grass growing through it yet. A texture like loose coffee grounds piled a foot high in open sun. Because these ants build toward warmth, not shade. Touch it with a stick and the whole surface starts moving within seconds. Hundreds of workers, boiling up out of the dirt at once, defending a queen nobody on the surface can even see. Start with why anyone would bother going to this much trouble over an anthill. A mature fire ant colony can hold well over 200,000 ants, all of them wired from birth to defend the nest the instant it's disturbed. That's not a guess dressed up as a number. Researchers who study these colonies have counted them, mound by mound, and a hill the size of a dinner plate can be sitting on top of a population larger than most small towns. A horse that plants a hoof in an active mound can rear hard enough to throw its rider into a fence post. A newborn calf that beds down too close to one might not make it to morning. And a mound left untreated doesn't stay one mound for long. A healthy colony buds off new queens, and those queens walk. Ignore a single hill in April, and you can be looking at 4 or 5 by August. Spread across a field a family walks through every single day. For most modern operations, the fix is a bag of pesticide granules and a spreader on the back of a truck. That option barely exists on an Amish farm, and not for one simple reason. Cost is part of it. A drum of commercial fire ant killer runs real money, and it needs reapplying every few months as fresh mounds show up. But the deeper reason is closer to identity than to budget. A farm that depends on a chemical company to protect its own herd isn't really running itself anymore. And running your own farm, answering to no one outside your family and your church district, sits close to gospel out here. That same pesticide can drift onto the bees working the orchard 2 fields over. It can wash into the pond the cattle drink from every afternoon. For a way of life built on self-sufficiency and on caring for land you intend to hand down, not just farm for a season, spraying poison across ground you'll be working for the next 50 years isn't a shortcut. It's a bill that comes due later, with interest. So the folk cures get tried first, and nearly all of them fail on contact with reality. Pour dry grits on a mound, expecting the ants to eat them and swell up until they burst, and nothing happens, because worker ants physically can't digest solid food. Only the oldest larvae can process anything that isn't liquid, and they're buried 3 feet down, where the grits never reach them. Mix baking soda and vinegar and pour it in the hole, hoping the fizzing reaction gases the colony, and you'll kill the grass and exactly 0 ants. Take a shovel to the mound to disrupt it directly, and you'll get stung a dozen times in the first 4 seconds, while most of the colony vanishes deeper into the tunnel system, safe, angry, and ready to rebuild somewhere you can't see. Half measures aren't neutral here. A colony that survives a clumsy attack learns to relocate its queen, and now, instead of 1 mound to deal with, there are 2. What actually works is almost insultingly simple on paper, and almost nobody does it correctly on the first try. It starts the evening before, with a fire built under a cast iron kettle or an old barrel, heating somewhere between 3 and 6 gallons of water, depending on how big the mound looks from the outside. Not warm, not hot. As close to a rolling boil as a man can carry across a field without the handle scalding straight through a leather glove. Agricultural extension researchers who've tested plain boiling water on fire ant mounds put its success rate at around 60% on a single treatment, using roughly 3 gallons per hill. That number sounds unimpressive until you understand exactly why it's so low. Most people pour a kettle straight over the visible dome of dirt and consider the job finished. That is the mistake, and it's the one that gives boiling water its bad reputation as a folk remedy that only half works. The visible dome isn't the nest. It's barely the front porch. Underneath the mature mound is a lattice of interconnected tunnels and brood chambers, running 2 to 6 feet down, sometimes deeper, engineered by the colony for exactly this situation. It exists so the ants can retreat away from any single point of attack, carrying the queen and the eggs with them. Pour water on the dome, and you've scalded the roof of an empty room. The queen is already 3 feet below, dry, untouched, and rebuilding by nightfall. The version that actually finishes the job, the version used in field research to eliminate colonies for good rather than just knock them back, doesn't treat the mound as a target on the surface. It treats the whole underground structure as a container that needs to be filled completely before the pouring stops. The farmer works the perimeter instead of the centre, pouring at 3 or 4 points around the base of the mound in a slow, steady stream, watching the ground the entire time instead of the bucket. The first gallon disappears fast, swallowed whole by tunnel space no one on the surface can see. He keeps pouring. And then it happens. The moment every farmer who's done this more than once is actually waiting for. The water starts coming back up. Not from where he's pouring it in, but from a completely different opening, 10 or 12 inches away. An entrance that looked sealed shut a minute earlier and is suddenly bubbling. That's the signal the tunnel network is finally fully flooded. There is no dry chamber left underground for the colony to retreat into. The queen, the brood, every worker ant in the nest, all of it is now sitting in water hot enough to kill on contact, with nowhere left to run. For a mid-sized mound, the actual pouring, heating aside, takes somewhere around 5 to 15 minutes once the water starts going in. A bigger mound, the kind that's been left alone for a full season and grown into something the size of a truck tyre, might swallow 6 gallons and take 2 separate kettles before the water finally surfaces on a second and third hole. That's the real severity ladder here. Not danger to the farmer, but scale underground. The bigger the visible mound, the more hidden tunnel it's protecting, and the more water it takes before there's finally nowhere left for the colony to hide. None of this is a gentle process, and rushing it is how people get hurt. A gallon of near-boiling water sloshing at close range in bare grass is genuinely dangerous. And every farmer who does this regularly has a story about the one afternoon he got careless and paid for it. Thick boots, long pants tucked in, eyes on the ground the entire time, because a startled colony doesn't wait to sting. Grass dies too in a 2-foot ring around the mound for the rest of the season. No version of this pretends to be tidy. It demands the same respect a fire always demands. Nothing more forgiving than that. But weigh that cost against what a bag of pesticide does over the same acre, season after season, year after year. The family farms that ground. One controlled fire, one careful 10 minutes on your knees in wet grass, watching for water to bubble back up somewhere it shouldn't, against a chemical that has to be repurchased every few months, and that eventually finds its way into the same well feeding the kitchen. The math changes depending on which cost you're willing to carry. This method isn't secret, and it isn't exclusively Amish. Agricultural researchers across the fire ant belt have studied full flood techniques for decades, some of them building purpose-made hot water rigs to test colony elimination in the field. What's different on an Amish farm is fit, not invention. On an operation running horse-drawn equipment and wood heat to begin with, boiling several gallons of water over an open flame isn't a special project. It's Tuesday. The infrastructure for doing this the hard way was never removed in the first place, because it was never replaced to begin with. A neighbour running a diesel tractor has to make a special trip for a bag of granules. A farmer working with the same tools his grandfather used just needs a kettle he already owns and a fire he was probably going to build that evening regardless. That's really the whole story hiding underneath the mound. It isn't that Amish farmers discovered some secret weapon the rest of agriculture overlooked. It's that they never gave up the one tool that existed before the chemical aisle did. And it still works, provided you're patient enough to keep pouring until the water comes back up on its own. So the next time a fire ant mound shows up in your own yard and your hand goes straight for a bag of poison out of habit, it's worth asking what you're actually buying. Are you ending the colony or just renting a few months of peace before you have to pay for the same bag again? A method like this one costs almost nothing and asks for almost everything: time, attention, the willingness to stand over near boiling water and wait for a signal most people would give up looking for after the first minute. That trade is exactly why it disappeared from most yards and never disappeared from this one. Somewhere out past the edge of the pesticide aisle, there's a method that's been quietly working since long before anyone thought to sell fire ant killer in a plastic jug. And it's still sitting there, waiting on nothing more complicated than a fire, a kettle, and the patience to watch the water rise.